First, I must apologise to the many people who were unable to access my last video on the case of Betty Williams, 1961. YouTube slapped some sort of restriction on the video, and there was little I could do about it. It's frustrating when something of this kind happens. I think it's the third time it's happened to me now. And it persuades me that YouTube may ultimately prove ephemeral, or at least less reliable, and that my videos might be removed at any time for any number of reasons by those who control it. It also convinces me of something which has been on my mind for a time, and that I should make haste in transcribing these videos into printed form, because the printed word, it's still more durable than the internet, it seems to me. And I have, with that in mind, produced the first eight episodes that I did for They Got Away with Murder, suitably updated and revised, but I've tried to cleave as closely as possible as I can to the original format and to the spirit in which I delivered them. And I aim to do the same with the episodes which follow. I think in terms of 8 episodes as being a volume. So this is volume 1. Very imaginative of me. And I will produce volume 2, 3, 4, each with 8 episodes in, or at least that's the intention. At the end of that time, there should be a nice collection of these, for me, if for no one else. The case of Lorraine Jacob interests me chiefly because of its epilogue, and also because it's set in a part of Liverpool that I'm familiar with. See what you make of it. The 2nd of September 1970 was a rain-swept morning in Liverpool. The corporation refuse lorry turned into Rodney Street, collecting and compacting the accumulated refuse of the night before. Rodney Street is characterised by its elegant Georgian terraced houses, known for its doctors and professional classes who prefer city living to the suburbs. Gladstone was born at number 62. The well-known photographer E. Chambray Harpen and his wife Margaret lived at number 59, and Brian Epstein, manager of the Beatles, was born at number 4. In fact, it was a few yards from Epstein's erstwhile family home that the refuse lorry drew to a halt. Here an alley runs adjacent to number 4, and off left to the rear of the house, a cobbled lane provides access to the rear of the houses. There was some rubbish near the wall there, directly to the rear of number 3, and as the 2 dustmen walked towards this, they saw the body of a woman lying on the pavement, partially concealed by the rubbish. She had clearly been dead for some time. 3 full chip packets lay near to her, and a handbag and a baby's crocheted bonnet were just a few feet away. It was 8:05 a.m. The city was stirring into life, even as a young woman's life had ended, amongst the detritus and debris of the city, her face cold against the pavement. Police were on the scene within minutes, and quickly ascertained from the contents of the handbag that the woman was named Lorraine Jacob of 51 Russell Street, which was about a quarter of a mile distance from where she lay. Dr. Charles St. Hill, one of Britain's most eminent doctors, and a Home Office pathologist of considerable experience, arrived and examined the body in the alley. He at once determined that the woman had been battered and strangled. It also appeared that Lorraine's underwear was missing. This led to an immediate suspicion amongst police officers present that the motive for Lorraine's murder had been sexual in nature. There was no purse or money in her handbag, so robbery was also suspected. Hill ordered the removal of the body to the mortuary so he could undertake a full post-mortem examination. But he was clear about one thing: Lorraine Jacob had been murdered. At once what is known as the system of Liverpool Criminal Investigation Department sprang into action. Superintendent Howell Davis was head of the Liverpool CID, and he and Superintendent Tom Whittleston and Detective Chief Inspector John Jameson went quickly to the scene, where they held a hurried conference. Within an hour of the body's discovery, 2 rooms had been allocated to the investigation at nearby Harvey Street police station. Filing cabinets had been brought in, stacks of blank filing cards, minute sheets, and other stationery delivered. A murder squad of 90 detectives was also assembled, and a 24-hour manned hotline was established too. Every single message, frivolous, foolish, hoaxes and all, would be recorded, checked and double-checked henceforth. All leave was cancelled for those engaged in the inquiry. The entire purpose and function of Liverpool CID had become the apprehension of the murderer of Lorraine Jacob. By 12:30, early that afternoon, 41-year-old Mrs. Mary Agnes Jacob, who had been anxious since the previous evening about the whereabouts of her 19-year-old daughter, received the worst of all possible visits. Grim-faced detectives knocked on her door at 51 Russell Street and informed her that her daughter had been found dead in an alley to the rear of number 3 Rodney Street, just a quarter of a mile away. They then accompanied her to the mortuary, where she formally identified the body as being that of her daughter, Lorraine. Lorraine Marguerite Jacob was born on the 16th of September 1950 in Liverpool to Mary Agnes Brady and John Jacob Bermude, who was originally from Lagos in Nigeria. She had an elder sister, Kathleen, and a number of half-brothers and sisters from her father's previous marriage. After leaving school at 16, she worked as an assistant at Port Sunlight soap factory, which lasted up until 6 weeks before the murder, when she had given this up, having given birth to a baby boy. She was therefore unemployed at the time of the murder, living with her mother and sister at 51 Russell Street, and had 2 children, a girl, Karen, who was 14 months old, and a baby of just a few weeks, called Tony. She appears to have been a well-liked girl, friendly and sociable, had numerous friends, and was a regular at Yates's wine lodge in Great Charlotte Street. A post-mortem was conducted by Dr. Charles St. Hill that afternoon in the presence of detectives, and he concluded that Lorraine had been killed by the administration of pressure to the neck, nose and mouth, which he considered would have required considerable force. He also believed she had fought her attacker, and it was possible her assailant was marked from this. As far as he could ascertain, death had occurred during the night, probably before midnight. As it had not rained until 3 a.m., and the ground beneath Lorraine was dry when she was found, it was clear she had been murdered before 3 a.m. at the very latest. It did emerge at the post-mortem, however, that in spite of original suspicions, which accrued from the girl's missing knickers, now known from Lorraine's mother to have been blue, Lorraine had not been sexually assaulted. An inquest was opened that afternoon, Wednesday the 2nd of September, under the Deputy City Coroner, Mr. G. A. Ensor. The circumstances of the discovery of Lorraine's body were given, and evidence of identification confirmed by her mother. The inquest was then adjourned until the 5th of October to allow police time to pursue their inquiries. Lorraine's mother told detectives that she had last seen her daughter at around 8 o'clock the previous evening, when Lorraine had left the house saying she was going out, but would not be away for long. She had left her 2 infants with their grandmother, and left the house at 51 Russell Street. It was the last she had seen of her. She also told detectives that Lorraine had been wearing a pair of brown tights, and so it was presumed Lorraine's killer had also taken these. A blue purse, which Lorraine had carried in her handbag, was also confirmed to be missing. At Copper's Hill Police Station, now the centre of the investigation, police quickly established a timeline of Lorraine's movements leading up to her death. This read, Tuesday, September the 1st, 8 p.m. Lorraine left her home at 51 Russell Street for what was to be a normal night out. Her two illegitimate children, Karen, aged 14 months, and Tony, a few weeks, were being looked after by their grandmother. Lorraine and the girlfriend were given a lift from the Sandon Street area of the city to Great Charlotte Street. 9 p.m. Lorraine was seen in Yates's wine lodge, Great Charlotte Street. 10:20 p.m. Lorraine left the wine lodge and walked round to Lewis's, where she left her two companions and walked up Brownlow Hill. 10:30 p.m. Lorraine was seen in a Chinese chip shop in Great George Street. While waiting to be served with 3 packets of chips, she was seen to enter and leave the premises several times, as if she were looking for someone. 10:45 p.m. Lorraine left the chip shop and began to walk up Upper Duke Street, carrying the chips. 11 p.m. Lorraine was seen alive for the last time in Pilgrim Street. September the 2nd, 8:05 a.m. Lorraine's body discovered by Liverpool Corporation workmen. Lorraine had been killed sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight on the 1st of September, detectives were sure. But how or by whom she had met her death, there was as yet little to go on, other than the fact she had been strangled and items of clothing and her purse removed. Initial inquiries by police ascertained that Lorraine had met a girlfriend who was wearing a brown coat, and a man whom police called Tony, who gave the girls a lift in a white Ford Zephyr, or possibly a Cortina, from Sandon Street to Great Charlotte Street. Later she had been seen in a fish and chop suey takeout at 25 Great George Street at about 10:45 p.m. They appealed for Tony to come forward to provide them with further information. By Friday morning, Tony had done so. Detective Superintendent Tom Whittleston told press, "We interviewed him this morning, and he told us about the lift he gave the two girls between Sandon Street and Great Charlotte Street. It seems that both Tony and the girl in the brown coat, Lorraine's companion, were traced, and that they had last seen her at around 10:20 p.m., when Lorraine had crossed into Brownlow Hill and parted company with them. At this point she was close to home, but she turned south, walking about half to 3/4 of a mile to Great George Street, to a Chinese fish and chip shop, and was there seen chatting to 3 children, 2 Chinese girls of 14 and 16, and a youth of roughly the same age. Police toured schools in the area in an attempt to locate the 3 youngsters, and were able to exclude them from their inquiries. Upon leaving the chip shop at about 10:45, she had headed north into Upper Duke Street, and here was seen for the last time, turning into Pilgrim Street. A huge investigation was soon in full swing, one of the biggest in Liverpool's history. Over 100 officers were involved in house-to-house inquiries. Pubs and places Lorraine was known to frequent were visited. More than 900 statements were taken, and 3,500 questionnaires filled in by people in the ensuing days. Appeals were made regularly to the public. On Saturday, the 5th of September, at half-time during a match between Manchester United and Liverpool at Anfield, Superintendent Whittleston made an appeal via the public address system, requesting information from anyone who had seen anything suspicious or strange in the area between 10:45 and midnight on the Tuesday evening. "We are satisfied that she met the person who killed her in the short distance between Upper Duke Street and where she was found," he said. Police also released the information concerning the missing blue knickers and brown tights to the public, appealing for their help in finding them. A painstaking search was mounted by police in the area and vicinity of Rodney Street with this purpose in mind, but to no avail. Nothing was discovered. A photograph of the crocheted baby's bonnet was also released, in case it bore any relevance to the murder. But still there was no concrete lead. Detective Chief Superintendent Howell Davis told press the police believed Lorraine may have been murdered elsewhere and her body dumped in the alley behind Rodney Street. Presumably Davis was thinking out loud when he said this, given that it was known by this time that Lorraine had been seen just a few hundred yards from where she was found. Several streets away, in Greenhays Road, a man was sitting, poring over the reports in the Liverpool Echo, and was thoughtful. He knew that Chief Superintendent Davis was wrong. One lead the police obtained was for a man seen on the corner of Pilgrim Street and Mount Pleasant, wearing a short white or beige mac at around 11 p.m. on Tuesday. He was described as being between 45 and 50 years of age and about 5 feet 5 or 6 inches in height, with dark hair parted in the middle. He had been looking in the window of Shape Gallery there. On Tuesday, the 8th of September, 1 week to the day following Lorraine Jacob's murder, police staged a reconstruction of the crime. Policewoman Jean Morrison retraced Lorraine's last walk through the dim-lit streets of Liverpool, from the fish and chip shop to the place at which her body was discovered. It took her 9 minutes, and the walk covered approximately 400 yards. In the absence of any solid leads, police made a fresh appeal to women who might be frightened of giving information concerning violent men, of attacks they might have sustained in the area but failed to report to police for whatever reason, assuring them that any information they gave would be treated in the strictest confidence. Although a great many calls were made to the police hotline and letters and information received, nothing substantive emerged from this. There were letters from cranks. Many were also well-meaning but wide of the mark. One hopeful lead was received on the 12th of September. A man called the telephone incident hotline at 1:30 p.m., stating he had vital information and wished to speak to a detective. He declined to give his number, but said he would call back at 5 p.m. At 5 p.m., a detective was waiting anxiously to receive the call. Hopes were high, but no call came. An appeal was made for the man to come forward, but he never did. It was another disappointment. An indication, perhaps, of the lack of leads police had in the case came when police made a fresh appeal for information concerning anyone who had been known to leave the city of Liverpool suddenly or unexpectedly after the 2nd of September. They appealed to landladies in particular, who might have had a lodger who had quit unexpectedly. They also asked for information concerning any man who had unexplained cuts or injuries to his face or hands around the 2nd of September. A map of the area in which Lorraine's body had been found was published in the Liverpool Echo at the behest of police. Such appeals led to a slew of fresh leads, but nothing came of them. No one had witnessed the attack or even seen Lorraine Jacob with a person after she was last seen alone turning into Pilgrim Street. No one knew anything about the matter. Well, someone did. Just a mile south of Rodney Street, a man was assiduously perusing the police reports of the matter in each edition of the Liverpool Echo, and carefully cutting out the articles each day and saving them in a folder. In the absence of anything new to the inquiry, renewed searches were undertaken around the city. Old dismissed leads were revisited, and a youth club near the scene was placed under close scrutiny for a time. Police received a report of a white van being seen in the Rodney Street entry at number 4, just minutes before Lorraine's body was found. Further appeals ensued. It was a frustrating business. The remotest possibilities were considered. 15 murders had been committed in Liverpool in the 15 months prior to Lorraine's murder, and all had been solved. Officers were determined that this would be solved too. Detectives were working 44 hours normal time and between 30 and 40 hours unpaid overtime, 80 to 90 hours a week in efforts to solve the murder. Every morning at 8 a.m. a review of leads took place, and a full briefing of officers took place at 9 a.m. Duties were assigned and officers designated to undertake various tasks in connection with the inquiry. At 7:30 in the evening, a second briefing was held, reviewing the day's findings. Overnight, a skeleton staff was on duty. As pressures on police mounted, hopes in the press diminished. Outwardly, at least, there was confidence amongst detectives that the murderer would be caught, the system would prevail. But leads became ever scarcer, and other priorities competed for police resources and manpower. It is not limitless. The by now 100-strong team of detectives dwindled as their workload subsided, winnowed as new crimes emerged and priorities were reshuffled. The headlines for Lorraine Jacob in the Liverpool Echo migrated from the front pages, became page 7 articles, became a brief column on page 10, a mere paragraph of some perfunctory occurrence, and then silence. In the new year of 1971, the case was stone cold. There was a brief revival of hopes, a renewal of activity in the early spring of that year, when, on March the 8th, Jackie Ansel Lamb, an 18-year-old girl hitchhiking from London to her Manchester home, was found murdered, strangled in a lover's lane near a woods, a mile from the Tabley M6 interchange. 5 miles from here she had been seen with a man in a cafe, who was reported to be in his 20s, about 5 feet 9 inches tall, and dressed in a dark suit. Cheshire Police contacted Liverpool CID to see if there might be a link to the Lorraine Jacob case, but apart from the manner of her death from strangulation, there seemed little synergy between the two cases. It was of passing interest, in which police hopes flared up briefly, only to subside as quickly again. But someone saw the article and took an interest, because he carefully cut out the article from the newspaper and placed it inside the folder he kept full of such cuttings. On the 7th of July 1971, the inquest into the death of Lorraine Jacob was reconvened after several postponements, this time before Mr. S.R. Barter, the Liverpool coroner. He declared the hunt would go on. Detective Chief Inspector John Jameson told the court, "The matter will never be forgotten or closed as long as there are police officers in the city." It was reassuring to the public, bravura even, but the trail, to the less sanguine, was cold. At the conclusion of the hearing, the jury returned a verdict of murder against a person or persons unknown. It had an unmistakable ring of finality about it. Police resources were diverted, the incident rooms now reassigned, the filing cards grew old, the files gathered dust. The case was whittled down until it became dormant, in permanent limbo, consigned to periodic review in case a new lead might present itself, or something new emerged, something unnoticed by the passing years. A new idea might spark. But it didn't. Somewhere in the city of Liverpool, a man who had paid a great deal of attention to the newspapers put away his own file, filled with newspaper cuttings gleaned from the Liverpool Echo. It is disappointing when justice is not done. It is a human instinct, as social beings, to see that wrong is righted or punished, to balance the books. And yet no human system is perfect. We know this. Innocent people are sometimes punished, and the guilty go free. It is an affront to us, but it is so. We also have an insatiable desire to know, to understand what happens, why it happens, even as we look around us every day and realize there are limits to our knowledge. We are not gods. But sometimes, very occasionally, when we have despaired of knowing something, the truth comes out. It was mid-February 2008. A small decorating firm in Wigan, Lancashire, was called by a family to tidy up a house in Reservoir Street, Aspel. It was the home of a recently deceased relative, and the family now wished to tidy it up to get it into a state fit to place the property on the market. As the decorators began to sort out the house, consigning the rubbish within to a skip, they discovered a leather satchel on top of a wardrobe in one of the 2 bedrooms. Inside the satchel were some unusual items: a Second World War era air pistol, a folder filled with old newspaper cuttings from the Liverpool Echo, which related to a murder that had occurred in 1970, and a pair of blue knickers. And there was something else. There was an envelope which was marked private and confidential. After some hesitation, the men opened this up and found 5 sheets of A5 writing paper inside, 9 sides of which were covered in neat cursive handwriting. This contained a detailed description of the murder of Lorraine Jacob on the evening of the 1st of September 1970. It had been written by the man who murdered her. The decorators handed over the satchel and its contents to Lancashire police, who immediately contacted Liverpool police. The inquiry into the murder of Lorraine Jacob was, almost 40 years after her death, reopened. The original detectives had all left the force, many were dead, and the new inquiry was led by Superintendent Ian Kemble. Although the account was unsigned and undated, the age of the yellowing papers suggested it had been written decades earlier, probably soon after the murder had occurred. What was especially remarkable was that the detailed description of the murder contained details which had never been released to the public. Subsequent handwriting analysis and DNA testing commissioned by officers confirmed that the account had been penned by the deceased occupant of the house. He was a man named Harvey Richardson. Harvey Richardson was born in Littleborough, Rochdale, in Lancashire, on the 10th of December 1930. His father was a surgeon, had served with distinction as a lieutenant surgeon in the First World War aboard the HMS Humber from 1914, was mentioned in dispatches, and awarded the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, in 1919 at the cessation of hostilities. He became a specialist radiologist after the war, something of an expert in the Lancashire region, serving a number of hospitals in the area. He married Muriel Franklin in 1915, but they subsequently divorced, after which he married 21-year-old Doreen Teresa Carnson. That was in 1929, and the following year Harvey was born. He had 2 younger brothers, Michael, born in 1933, and David, born in 1938. Harvey had the advantages of a comfortable home, growing up in Rivington, Bolton, was a bright but somewhat troubled child. His mother was extremely protective of him. He was a gifted linguist, enjoyed 20th century history, and loved books. He was especially interested in the Nazi era in Germany and communism in Russia, and taught himself to speak fluent German and Russian. When he was 21, Harvey's younger brother Michael died at the age of just 18. It may be assumed that this had a devastating effect on the family. Harvey had a relationship with a woman called Dorothy H. Gessner throughout the 1950s, and 2 daughters were born, Edith in 1953 and Ulrika in 1958. The relationship ended after the birth of the second daughter, and Harvey then moved to Liverpool for the first time. It was 1959. He was then 29 years old and spent time studying to be a librarian. He was quiet and studious, and as he loved books, this must have seemed a natural move for him. Richardson returned to Liverpool in 1969 to study at Liverpool College of Commerce for a librarianship qualification. It was a recurrent theme with him. He was almost 40 now, and still struggling to find a place for himself in society, or a career which might assist in this. It is probable that bouts of depression and erratic behaviour prevented Harvey from pursuing his studies with the consistency necessary to make a success of them. He was not disliked, but was regarded as being aloof and had difficulty making friends. He worked as a waiter at the Mariners' Restaurant in North St. John Street during this period, the same street which housed Cottle's Cafe and the Chess Club, to which William Herbert Wallace had travelled 40 years earlier and received the notorious call from Mr. Qualtrough. Harvey had then worked at Yates's Wine Lodge in Great Charlotte Street. It is probable that he met Lorraine Jacob here, as she was a regular customer. Here he was living at Huskisson Street during the first half of 1970, moving in July to Greenhays Road in September of 1970. This was approximately 1 mile south of number 3 Rodney Street, where Lorraine Jacob's body was found. From his account, which has not been released, it is clear that Lorraine Jacob had visited Harvey Richardson at his flat in Huskisson Street in mid-June 1970. He took photographs of her children, which he apparently objected to. Police have regarded the photos as being innocent in purpose, but in any case, Lorraine objected to this, and they argued over the matter. Perhaps she simply sensed the oddness of Richardson and felt discomforted by his interest in her children. Whatever her motivation, she was troubled by it, and called on Richardson subsequently in company with a girlfriend, and although he was not home at the time, the landlady admitted them. They stole 2 of his cameras. Presumably Lorraine was anxious to have the photographs and was uncertain which camera had been used to capture them. According to Richardson's account, when he returned home, the landlady told him of the visitors, and he knew immediately who the 2 women were. He did nothing about the theft of his 2 cameras, but there was plainly resentment in him, and the following month, in July, he moved out of the Huskisson Road flat and into accommodation in Greenhays Road. It was here Harvey Richardson was living on the 1st of September 1970. That day he had learned he had failed his librarianship examinations at Liverpool College of Commerce. He went out and got drunk. He was drinking all day and evening, according to his account. Later that evening he headed north in the city, had gone out, in his words, to meet some women, which police believed to mean an assignation with prostitutes. It was just after 11 p.m. when he saw Lorraine Jacob near Rodney Street, carrying 3 bags of chips. He immediately walked towards her, and she then saw him. As he approached her, she became startled, he wrote. His account referred to himself in the 3rd person, quite dispassionate and impersonal. They walked to Rodney Street and down an alleyway, where police say an argument broke out. In a fit of rage, Richardson strangled his victim and dropped her body to the cracked paving flags below. There had been no sexual assault, and why he had taken her knickers and tights is unclear. It may have been as a trophy of some kind, or for some other purpose of sexual deviation. Perhaps he wished to make her death look as if it had been committed solely with a sexual motive in mind, to distract from the business of the photos. But as this does not seem to confer any advantage on Richardson, it is unlikely. The most probable explanation is that Harvey Richardson did have a sexual motive. He had gone out seeking some women, after all. His encounter with Lorraine was fortuitous from his point of view. Whether Harvey Richardson wrote of this in his account we do not know, and will not know for some decades, given the fact that the police have retained the files from public access. But whether he did or didn't write of his motivation in this matter, it seems clear to me that given his purpose in going out that evening was sexual, his meeting with Lorraine quickly overtook this. Harvey was out of sorts that night. He had, at the age of almost 40, failed his librarianship examination. He was living in a bedsit in the south of the city. He was estranged from his common-law wife and 2 daughters. His prospects were blunted. He was now drunk and encountered a 19-year-old girl with whom he was acquainted, and who had relieved him of 2 cameras 3 months earlier. She owed him. Lorraine was startled to see him. It is plain she was uncomfortable with him, in spite of the fact that police have expressed their belief that the photos he took were innocent. Lorraine clearly did not think so. She may have had reason to suspect they were not, or she may simply have been uncomfortable, instinctively, with Harvey. In any case, she had stolen 2 of his cameras to deprive him of her child's photos. And now, here he was, an unstable man, a little the worse for wear, in a dim-lit Liverpool street. She looked startled. He quickly caught up with her. Their conversation inevitably dwelt on the 2 cameras she had taken from his flat. Whether she admitted to this or denied it, it hardly mattered, because he knew she had taken them. According to Harvey's account, they walked along Rodney Street together. In view of the last sighting of Lorraine being at the corner of Pilgrim Street, it seems probable to me that they walked up Pilgrim Street to the junction with the A5039, and here crossed diagonally into Rodney Street. She intended to walk north the half-mile to her home in Russell Street. Harvey Richardson accompanied her. They walked to Rodney Street and down an alleyway where police say an argument broke out. Harvey wrote. Now it seems Harvey is being economical with the truth here. It is highly improbable that Lorraine agreed to divert from the relative safety of Rodney Street down a darkened back alleyway. I also think it is unlikely she had agreed to have sex with him, given that she was apprehensive of him. She had 3 bags of chips in her hands, and she had clearly struggled against him. The most likely course of events here is that Harvey Richardson was either seeking sexual favours or was intent upon them in spite of her. That is, he forced Lorraine into the alleyway behind the houses with the intention of sexually assaulting her, and she struggled, during the course of which Harvey Richardson killed Lorraine. His hands over her mouth and nose were an attempt to silence her as she resisted him. His removal of her brown tights and her knickers suggests forcibly that he had a sexual purpose, but that her death, and possibly fear of apprehension, curtailed this. Lorraine was dead. Harvey Richardson then left the alleyway and moved south beyond the cathedral and into Toxteth. In Sefton Park, he said in his account, he had hung the brown tights on the branch of a tree, returning to his flat just 90 minutes after he had left it. Later, he had torn up a pawn ticket he found in the blue purse and flushed the pieces down the toilet. The blue purse he cut up into pieces and disposed of these later. In this curious, detached account, in which he refers to himself always in the 3rd person, there was no indication of remorse or regret. Perhaps this is why he chose to write in the 3rd person, or perhaps this was a symptom of Richardson's mental condition, an inability to empathize, to connect with others. Police studied his possessions, his background, and spoke with his family, and were able to corroborate 90% of Richardson's account, they said, by interviewing people who had known Lorraine or Richardson around 1970. And Superintendent Kemble filed a report on the matter and submitted this to the Crown Prosecution Service. After a careful review of the facts and evidence, a formal announcement was made that had Harvey Richardson still been alive, he would have been prosecuted for the murder of Lorraine Jacob. Of course, it would have been for a court and a jury to determine whether or not he was guilty of murder. The families of Lorraine Jacob, her mother, then 78, was still alive, and also the 2 daughters of Harvey Richardson, were duly informed of the findings of the police and Crown Prosecution Service. It was shocking news for the families of both. But it was hoped that some solace might be afforded the family of Lorraine in discovering what had happened 40 years earlier. For the family of Harvey Richardson, it would remain a dark episode, unspoken of, for future generations to be deprived of. He would remain, for those who knew the details, a dark and shadowy figure, prone to lifelong mental health issues, whose sudden lascivious rage one dark September evening in 1970 had overwhelmed his sanity to the point at which he murdered a 19-year-old mother of 2 small children. He stunted her and their futures, perhaps of those unborn who were deprived of the gift of existence. He was a man who had murdered, and consciously, quietly, and in a peculiarly detached way, got away with it. It seems that Harvey Richardson had not appeared on the police radar during the investigation of 1970. He was not a suspect, his name had not been mentioned to police, and he had never been questioned. It is strange that he had never been mentioned. It would seem that detectives would inevitably have asked the question of Lorraine's friends of any incident, however small, which might suggest a grievance against Lorraine, and the name of Harvey Richardson would inevitably have come to their attention. Her girlfriend, with whom she visited his flat just 10 weeks before her murder, clearly knew of the altercation between Richardson and Lorraine, and knew of the theft. Did it not occur to her that this might offer a possible motive? Did detectives ask her? We do not know. The files will not be released for many years in view of the relative recency of the murder. There will be a great deal on file about Harvey Richardson and about Lorraine also, but until then the matter will remain, to an extent, a matter of speculation. We do know that Harvey Richardson sat in his bedsit in Greenhays Road, bought the Liverpool Echo each day, and scanned the paper for references to the crime. When he found these, he cut the articles out and placed them in a folder he used for this purpose. The only anomaly amongst the cuttings was that of the murder of Jackie Ansel Lamb, which had never been solved and which had occurred in March of 1971, a few months after Lorraine's murder. Reviewing this case to see if there was a possibility that Richardson was responsible for this also, Superintendent Kemble and Lancashire Police determined that he was not. Richardson had never learned to drive, had never owned a car, and his description did not fit that of a man seen in a cafe with Jackie just before her murder. Nor did Richardson collect all articles on the Jackie Ansel Lamb murder. It is probable that his sole interest, therefore, in retaining this cutting was because it referred to Cheshire and Liverpool police considering whether or not the 2 cases were attributable to the same killer. They were not. As the months went by, any anxiety Richardson felt presumably lessened to an extent. It would never completely disappear. There would remain the persistent fear of a knock at the door, a car drawing up outside the house late at night, a blue flashing light, a police car in the road. A guilty mind is its own accuser. It can know no rest. He had a secret. He would always have a secret. The folder, the blue knickers, the account he had penned and sealed, private and confidential, were consigned to an old satchel. Richardson remained in Liverpool for 2 years following the murder, moving in 1972 to Didsbury in Manchester, where he studied at Manchester Polytechnic until 1975. In 1981, he lived in Essen in West Germany, where he taught for a few months. He then returned to study languages at Manchester Polytechnic. He worked for a time in some capacity in a library during the 1980s. By now his mother was in decline, and his Aunt Amy, a sister of his father, looked after him. But she died in 1995. His mother was greatly concerned about what would happen to her son after her death, and she made arrangements to buy a property in Reservoir Road, Aspel, placed in trust for her son, so that he would always have a place to live following her death. Neighbours at Reservoir Road recalled Harvey Richardson as being something of a gentle giant. He was pleasant but distant. His daughter, Edith, said he became animated and knowledgeable when matters of history or the languages he spoke came into the conversation in later years. After Harvey's mother, Doreen, died in 1994 at the age of 86, Harvey continued to live at 20 Reservoir Road until 2008, when he was diagnosed with cancer and was moved to Wigan and Lee Hospice. And it was here he died on the 10th of February 2008. He was 77 years old. 38 years earlier, Lorraine Jacob's body was released to her family 6 weeks after her death, an unusual length of time. A funeral was held at Allerton Cemetery on the 26th of October 1970 without undue ceremony. She was interred in a public grave, and no gravestone marked the place of her burial.